All right, this is lecture 8 for the Gilded Age. Today we're going to focus on the idea of urbanization. And urbanization is the mass migration of people to the cities. So the United States as an industrial powerhouse creates modern America as we know it today. You see skyscrapers in the cities. You see modern inventions and things coming to fruition um, that we have today. You have Sears catalog. You have transcontinental railroads, chewing gum, hot dogs, baseball. All these things start to emerge in society. So we have this industrial America creates a divided society, though. We have the very, very rich and then the very, very poor, which we've kind of focused on in this class. So you have the powerful rich and then you have this powerless poor. There's these 5 different groups that we've talked about, or we will continue to talk about. Laborers, which we're going to focus on in the coming days here. Farmers, Native Americans, immigrants, and African Americans. All right, so this industrialization leads to urbanization. It's a key concept you need to know because with the advent of industry, we now have people having to move into the urban centers, which are these big cities, because that's where jobs and housing is located. So farmers were forced off their land to move in. Workers can't move out because they can't get enough money to move out of these cities. Immigrants move immediately in because they are coming from other countries and they need a place to live and a place to work, so they go to these urban centers. And then we also have African Americans that are now fleeing towards the cities due to the Jim Crow laws of the South. So there's this great migration of African Americans from the South to the North and to the West, and into big cities where they have the opportunity to get jobs in the big cities. So we're going to talk about the conditions of these cities. There's an author. He's a muckraker, and we'll talk about what muckrakers are during the Progressive era. But just kind of a heads up that that's coming. His name is Jacob Riis. He wrote a book, and it's more of a photo book. It's called How the Other Half Lives. So we focus on the Gilded Age as being all these rich guys. He talked about gold-plated. This is the other half. This is the half that's inside. That's not gold. It's whatever is covered. The gold is covering. So you can see here. This is an image of the housing that people lived in. And it's awful. And this is what Jacob Riis was able to do. Was he was able to expose what was going on. The advent of the camera and better cameras with flash bulbs allowed Jacob Riis to go in and photograph all these people and all these living conditions and show everyone what the world was really like, or what our country was really like. So we have tenement slums. Constructors faced a problem. They needed to make efficient use of space, but they did have some minor health codes and housing codes that they had to create. So what they did is they actually created like a competition to see who could design the best building to be the most efficient use of space. And the solution that they came up with was called the dumbbell tenement. And it's called the dumbbell tenement because it looks like a weightlifter's dumbbell, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. It was designed to maximize the amount of space, amount of people that could live in a small amount of space, okay, with maintaining these health codes. And the standard tenement slum, the standard dumbbell tenement, had 4 apartments to a floor, and they grew more and more narrow as you went inwards. Okay, the center was public hallways, and it had 2 public bathrooms. If you were lucky, you had 2 bathrooms on your floor. Earlier tenement slums wouldn't even have bathrooms. They'd actually have outhouses on the outside. So if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to go outside to the outhouse. And if you look at it, apartment buildings that hold 40, 50, 60, 70 people using 1 or 2 outhouses, you could see that they probably would get full very fast. Okay, when they got full, all they did was pick it up and move it over one little area, and all the waste that the people had emitted would be sitting outside. Very, very dirty, not really proper health conditions, and it got people very, very sick. A lot of times their wells would be located near these outhouses, and the wells weren't really constructed very well, no pun intended, and the waste would seep into the well, and then it's in the drinking water, and it gets people sick. A lot of times the water wasn't really thought of as a place where disease could be harbored, and people didn't really think about the consequences of dumping waste. There's a incident where there was a outbreak of E. coli or some sort of sickness, and it was spreading throughout this town. So people went in and started to research it, and what they found was that there was a pattern of people getting sick that centered at one water pump station, and it kind of just like made its way, rippled its way out from that water pump. And what they found was that the water pump drew its water from a river that was fairly close by, and they had also found that upstream just a little bit there was a town that was dumping all its waste into the water. So that waste was going into the water, flowing downstream, going into the water source, and people were drinking it and getting sick and dying because of that. So just some issues that people had with cleanliness and the lack of health codes. They say there's health codes, but there really weren't that many that could do a lot to help people out. They weren't really strict enough. All right, so here's a picture of the dumbbell tenement. You can see the living room. It starts in the public hall. There could be bathrooms up in here, and then you have the bedrooms, and then the living rooms, and then the parlors where you would make your food and whatnot. So there's 4 apartments per building or per floor, and then you typically would have 2 to 3 families living in one apartment. So anywhere from like 8 to 12 people living in this small little tiny apartment. It got quite clogged, and there were a lot of people in there. The cool new invention that these people had was they had an air shaft that would bring fresh air up to the apartment. The problem is they didn't always use it for air shafts. Sometimes they would actually throw their garbage out through the air shaft and have it go out on the front yard because there's no trash collectors or anything like that. And eventually these air shafts would get clogged, and then the air would still come up, but they're clogged with trash, so then your house would smell like trash because they were dumping their trash out that way. All right, so some of these slums, 6 to 7 stories high, housing around 300 people in 84 rooms. More than often than not, they're packed in to make a profit. So as many people as they could fit in there, the better. Again, the purpose of the air shaft is what I just talked about here. All right, so this is called Misery Lane, where all these people are living because there's a lot of dirt and disease and crime. 1 out of 10 have tuberculosis. There's no running water in the sewer system. I talked about the outhouses. Trash is dumped on the streets. There's no trash collector, so people just threw their garbage on the ground, threw it out in front of the yard, out on the streets, and it would pile up. There's a lot of fires, starvation, homelessness, and many of these homes are actually transformed into makeshift factories and weren't even used as homes, and they could try to maximize a profit of making a factory in a cheap tenement. Is an awful place to live. These are some problems that we're going to discuss later on because these are some things that need to be fixed. They're not, it's not acceptable to live like this, especially in modern America where there's a lot of money and there's things that people can do about it. This is going to be one of the biggest issues brought up by the progressive era, and the fact that we need to fix the problems with our society. That's going to be it for the lecture today. I'll see you later.